Hey, what's up, everyone? Don't forget to email me at loslibertinos210@gmail.com to get information about the event that I'm going to be having here at my home for Cinco de Mayo weekend. It will be May 7th. We are going to have a 1-year anniversary show episode with Bug Johnson from the Counterflow podcast, Matt Erickson from the King Pilled podcast, Andrew from Property Liberty podcast, and Kyle Anslone from the Conflicts of Interest podcast. We're going to have a 2 or 3 hour show here, depending on how the flow goes. It'll be a highly produced episode that I'm trying to put out. And also we're going to have a good cabrito that my primo is going to make. And then, of course, after the episode is recorded and done with, we will party and hang out and watch the Canelo fight. So it's going to be a good weekend, a good Saturday evening, and I hope you can make it out. Once again, email me at loslibertinos210@gmail.com to get information and get your ticket by just doing a pitch in there. So just email me for information. I'll hook you up, and hope to see you there. Peace. Welcome, everyone, to Los Libertinos podcast. I am your host, Carlos Abelar, and this is Chingazos and Fire, episode number 39. Our guest today is Wilfred Reilly. He is a professor of political science at Kentucky State University. He holds a PhD in political science from Southern Illinois University and a law degree from the University of Illinois. He's an author of several books with titles like Taboo, 10 Facts You Can't Talk About, Hate Crime Hoax, and the $50 million question. Welcome, Wilfred, and thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
So for anyone that might not know who you are, can you give a background of your born and raised and some of your, your path through life, educational, professional, and how you kind of got to a point kind of where you are in your life right now?
Yeah, well, I actually had a pretty long, interesting life. At one point I was an organizer for Occupy Chicago. I grew up in the hood originally. So to begin at the beginning, I'm from Illinois. My mom was, for a good chunk of her life, an inner city school teacher. So I was born in Chicago. I was born in the city itself, lived on the south side for a little bit. I really grew up in kind of pre-gentrification Wicker Park, which is jokingly called Needle Park at the time. It's now a very hipster district with, stores selling $200 messenger bags and so on. But it was originally just an authentic urban, artist and immigrant neighborhood. Kind of a mix of Latino cats, Polish babushkas and people with purple hair and a heroin problem. But I was just kind of a city kid. I went to Catholic school for a little bit because the Chicago Catholic schools are more functional than the public schools. So I went to St. Mary's. Went to public later, ended up, a lot of this was we moved when I was a little prior to high school to the nearby city of Aurora, which is Illinois' second largest city. And that's a working class, mostly Hispanic community. I grew up on the east side of Aurora from that point forward. I went to East Aurora Senior High School. I was a student. I was an athlete, although not a particularly good one. My best sport was middle distance track running. But so I had a pretty normal working class background, I think. My mom, I later found out, was upper class, actually. She's a Chicago ward, a well-known Black family. But she apparently had some kind of fight with the rest of the family and decided to work a series of jobs and eventually ended up kind of doing good. I didn't get really back in touch with a lot of them until fairly recently, actually. But anyway, so I grew up in these different communities. I lived in some sort of standard kind of working class areas, some artistic areas, some just straight up slums. Actually, parts of East Aurora in the 1990s was the murder capital of the Midwest. What happened apparently, well, I mean, not apparently, I was there, but was that black gangs from Chicago, as the projects were torn down, tried to move into the area and wound up in conflict with the local Latino and Caucasian gangs. A bunch of people got shot. So this was going on while I was in high school, and when I was wondering if I'd get an academic or even potentially athletic scholarship to college. As it happened, that actually did occur. I got a lot of funding, mostly academic. I'm 5'9", but to attend university. And again, I did that in the great state of Illinois. So I went to Southern Illinois University as an undergrad, and enjoyed that experience. SIU at the time was on Playboy's list of the top 100 party schools pretty much annually. One point, I think 1994, we were number one. Now, we were not on the list, anyone's list of the top 100 academic schools. I mean, perfectly solid regional college. But I graduated from there. And by this point, I'd begun to realize like I was fairly intelligent. And I also had a background that would appeal to, a certain kind of middle-class person that wants to do good. Like, I'm Black, small about Native, of Celtic descent on the white side. I was from this sort of dangerous area and I could write about it. And so I figured I might go to graduate school, and I applied, got into some law schools, I think a few grad schools this first time around, but I, again, stayed in state, good kind of solid school. I went to the University of Illinois College of Law, but the path just kept almost incidentally going upward. Like I realized at Illinois Law, where I was kind of a jackass. I mean, didn't turn 21 until I think my second year there. Because I mean, if you're going to these urban, public schools, or if you're going to these sort of state universities, you're willing to work, have a job or something in the summer and take 18 credit hours each semester. I mean, you get done with school pretty quickly. And again, I played sports in high school. My mom was a teacher in the high school. So it really wasn't like a back-breaking academic experience. Like I didn't necessarily have to do much of anything, although I usually did. But I mean, as I progressed, obviously, still a bit immature, but law school was a much more real experience. And at this point, I realized, well, I'll probably wind up in a professional position that I wouldn't initially have expected to be in. I'm still curious what that will be, though. But because of the age factor, when I graduated from Illinois Law, I was 22. And what I had trained for, to the extent you train for anything in law school, is white-collar criminal prosecution. As someone from a fairly violent area, I didn't have a lot of love for crime. But I also, if you're going to pursue criminals with the full strength of the U.S. government, I kind of wanted that to be some of these corporate guys we were seeing on TV at the time, as versus like some kid standing on a corner with a dime bag in his pocket. So, I mean, I took criminal law, Crim 2, Crim Pro, civil procedure, all that stuff. My grades overall were pretty mediocre, but they were solid in these courses. And that was the field that I was, as I recall, I don't know, transcript in front of me. But I mean, that was the field that I expected to go into. And that's very serious, very professional. So when I was done with legal education, I thought about applying for jobs in that area. They would have done pretty well. But there was also the possibility, I was starting to get invitations to apply for some graduate programs in the state, where you get a few more years you get an additional credential and you get a few more years to kind of think about things. And I ended up back at Southern Illinois University. I was part of a program called a DFI, Diversifying the Faculty of Illinois. They wanted more minority men in different fields. So I took that. And the idea was, you come here, you'll get a PhD in 4 years, and then you'll leave and do whatever. You can work any job, but you'll probably have to pay back some of the funds if you go into law. And I said, okay, I'll practice my Frisbee skills for a couple more years and finish this degree. And then I'll have kind of join the American upper middle class. But that wasn't what ended up happening, actually. Like, my mom got really sick during this period. So I ended up coming back to Chicago to help her out as best as I could. And this ended up taking about 10 years. I obviously got the degree. I got it in 2015. But I left Illinois with the law degree in 2005. So during that 10-year period, I did a range of things that helped shape my perspective. Like, I was an actual radical leader. Like, I was part of the Occupy Chicago movement for a while and was known. I mean, I threw an event called Rockupy Chicago at one point that had hundreds of people at it. I was an organizer for the Human Rights Campaign, or for a group called, let's say, the Fund for the People's Interest, that does all their canvassing. I was what's called a field manager. So I'd take these canvas crews for activist causes. We're based on the south side of Chicago, but all around the city and to surrounding areas. When I got tired of that, although it did help raise some money, I mean, it helped me keep keep me in the area to, support mom or help mom out, really. But I mean, once that happened, I got tired of such a competitive, confrontational job. I worked on a sales floor for a while, kind of a bullpen guy in that whole Michigan Avenue, LaSalle Street sales and trading floor world, which is really in that genre, sort of second only to Wall Street. And just did a bunch of other different random things. Like I taught in the city colleges of Chicago, which was an interesting experience. That's the community colleges. So it's like Malcolm X and Harold Washington, all those schools. So I was like one of the like at night supplementary teachers just for a range of other people that were trying to make it out of the city at that time. And finally, at the end of this whole period, I got the PhD. And it was really pretty anticlimactic. Like you do the dissertation defense. I had the degree. I hadn't done badly in graduate school. And so I then just started applying in the academic world. But I had picked up a lot of ideas from all these different things that had happened, sort of working class childhood, working within an activist or a radical organization, seeing how fun, but how sometimes sketchy that can be. I'd seen a fairly decent level of corporate business where you have titles like senior sales executive and you're pitching CEOs. And I wanted to see whether some of the things that I had thought over the years, like a lot of the claims made by the political left about, say, white privilege are pretty nonsensical. They're unlikely to factually stand up, whether those are true. And I had a lab and a university provided set of computers and so on. And that's pretty much what I did. KSU, solid school, great kids. They've been pretty cool with it. But I mean, like my first book, Hate Crime Hoax, looks at kind of the reality, which I hadn't seen explored before, that a lot of these high profile cases of racial conflict, so on, turn out to be complete bullshit. And like you just watching over the years, everyone has to have noticed this. I mean, Duke Lacrosse, Tawana Brawley, Jussie Smollett, Covington Catholic, and Yasmin Saweed, the torn hijab, the nooses on college campuses. It would be easy to come sort of off the head with 20. So I looked at how common this was and put together a data set that's now around 1,000 cases, individual cases, not case studies. But that was the first one. The second book, Taboo, I use kind of modern empirical methods to look at the claims that are made by activist organizations within society, from Black Lives Matter to the alt-right, that have gotten a great deal of coverage. And this ranges from, thousands of unarmed Black people annually are killed by the police. Chair Nobiko on Primetime Fox said it was at very least hundreds, used the term murdered. From that over to the claim that, for example, the USA is massively demographically changing right now, which again, that's in the alt-right chapter. That seems to not be true to some extent. Like the basic background there, like the largest minority group in the United States is mostly Caucasian Hispanics. That's neither good nor bad, but like the majority of Latinos, you might correct me on some of this, but ID is white. Second largest group is Asian immigrants. So in terms of the idea that there's a wave of Black or Native Americans growing in size, whether that would be good or bad, that's not really true. So there's a chapter on that, but there are far more chapters, of course, on claims from the left that simply aren't accurate. So at one point in Taboo, we look at interracial crime. And this at the time the book came out, 2020, there'd been a flurry of these stories, Pool Patrol Paula and Barbecue Becky and so on down the line, all of this, like the Central Park dog walking fist fights, been up to very serious things like Dylan Roof. But I mean, what I actually found just looking through the annual BJS data, and people have done this before, of course, but is that interracial
BJS, violence, what is BJS? What is that? I don't know what that is.
Oh, the BJS is the Bureau of Justice Statistics. So anyone that's interested in US crime data or what crime actually looks like in the USA as opposed to hysterics on MSNBC or even Fox can just pull this up. Just Google BJS report crime data in the year you're interested in, like 2019. But the short version is that violent crime involving Blacks and whites, what we're often frightened with, that turned out to be 3% of crime, roughly. There's 600,000 cases that fit that bill every year out of 20 million, what do you call index crimes, serious crimes. But more importantly, or equally importantly, and even more underreported, this category of crime turned out to be 80 or so percent, 80 to 90% Black on white. So not only did we not have an interracial crime problem in the first place, the media seems to be actively reversing the direction of coverage when this does occur. So it's just the whole point was, with the degree in hand, I'm going to look at these things in society that people keep saying and see how true they are. And I also do sort of wonky writing about political science topics. I'll be at the Midwest Political Science Conference in a couple of weeks. I don't know exactly when this is going to drop, but back home in Chicago, I'll be at the American Political Science Conference later this year. But one of my interests is using these techniques that I picked up during this extensive education to check out questions that I was curious about throughout my earlier life. But what's the level of classism still in the USA? Something that's never discussed. Does white privilege exist? How are race relations looking? So on.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're gonna get all into that, and man, I got a lot of I'm active on. I try to be active on all social media stuff, but I put that I was gonna interview you on Facebook, and yeah, I got some action on that. So
Good.
So being from San Antonio, I'm a sports guy, a Spurs fan. And I mostly agree with Coach Pop's take on kind of like the race relation stuff. I mean, he uses it, he puts it in terms of like sports analogy. So that's the way that I, always try to bring things back to, because it's a way that you can always relate. You can always explain things. So he kind of just says like that simply by like being born white on you're already at the 50-yard line of a 100-yard dash, and it's like you have a systemic already advantages that are hundreds of years old, and I kind of tend to think that a little bit of that makes sense to me, because to me I've always looked at the closer you are to government action, and then the closer you are to like private sector action, and there's two different types of action, and yes, I do believe that you can have some connections that go, not everybody, but maybe the most, wealthier, or, you have these lineages of families and these lineages of, or maybe even just being close to, so government, that you know how the government game works, where you can, prosper more than other people, the closer you are to government, whether it's you're a teacher, or you just bid on contracts, or whatever the case is, like the closer you are to government. So in that sense, I do feel that the longer that you've known about the government game, you have an advantage. But every year, or every time that time goes on, those advantages start disappearing some. Like for instance, I now do more government contracting that we in our family, and we didn't before. So now my daughters and anybody that knows me and my family, there's no reason why I couldn't teach to them the government game of bidding contracts. But I had to have gotten to that game to realize it. And now moving forward, generations forward will be like, oh, Tío Carlos or Don Carlos from many years ago, he's the first one that got into the government contracts. And now we're okay because, and then that would be me having an advantage over somebody. But it was because I was closer to the government action. So I don't know, is Pop right? Is he wrong? Is there really an advantage to just being born white, or is it just hyped up, or was he right in a different time? So what is your take on the advantage on I mean, if you're born white, you already have an advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a sports guy myself. I like Coach Popovich. Now he's a little bit to the left of Karl Marx if you listen to him talk, but he's a good guy, solid coach, team, family man. I think there are three ways I'd respond to that. First, I think whether there's an advantage to being white or to being, brown or whatever, it really depends on the environment that you're in. I mean, if I were trying to set something up with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce in San Antonio, it wouldn't be an advantage to be a blonde Anglo. So, I mean, there's just this basic reality of 17% of the country is Hispanic, 8 or 9% is Asian. There's a huge Black business community. So, I mean, in many, many situations that I encounter as a businessman, when I'm doing consulting work or when I'm talking to a men's group or something, it would be a big disadvantage to be white. So I wouldn't sell that base short. I also think that there's also an attempt by whites on the left, to compensate really strongly, sometimes over much, for the conflicts and wars of the past. So, I mean, we have structural, entrenched affirmative action in the USA. Like when I say I went to grad school, and I deserved to go to grad school, I was quite good at the time. But like when I say I went to grad school, and there was a program called Diversifying the Faculty, just specifically the upper middle class educational sector of one state that had tens of millions of dollars in funding and that paid for me to go, that's an advantage that I wouldn't have had I been white. I probably would have wound up as a trial lawyer or something like that, which would be good. I'd probably have a much more stable life in the sense of, wife and two and so on, than being like a semi-famous writer who, does some of the stuff that I actually do. But I mean, that's obviously an advantage that I had. So, I mean, and you have to set aside first, in like 30-40% of the arenas, we have the advantage. And it would just be bizarre to describe that in a whole range of settings, from going to county jail to applying for a government contract. It's not an advantage to be Caucasian. I think overall it probably is. Again, I think sometimes when you get into the quote unquote Black or Hispanic conservative sector, you do get a lot of people that are themselves overcompensating a little, that are kind of from the business world, that really want to fit in. It's not my original background. I don't necessarily think it's yours, but it can get a little silly when people deny that racism exists at all and so on. I mean, there's still country clubs and fraternal orders and so on today that won't admit Black or Hispanic or Jewish males, certainly. So sure, overall, sometimes, yeah, for whites as well. But even there, the flip is that it's not all whites. It's a class thing. This is something a lot of people don't understand. In America, we're not supposed to have social classes. So no one is supposed to be, I mean, I know in Spanish it's patron, the boss man. I mean, it's the same thing, France, England. I mean, in a lot of these European countries, there's a hereditary nobility. We believe that we've rejected that. No one is, a haciendado. No one has land and people compelled to work it. So we ignore the fact that there's subtler class mechanisms, like what college did you go to? What degree do you have? What part of the country your family's from? That really do operate, who do you know, as you said really well, that really do operate all over the place. So if you're a white girl from Chicago with red hair and a clover leaf tattooed on her cheek, do you enjoy an advantage for being white? No. If you just got here from Bosnia, no. You might have a 2% advantage over an equally broke Black guy who's also sitting around in front of the projects. But overall, like if you're a white Bosnian kid in a St. Louis housing development, do you have an advanced white privilege? No. You're probably involved in more fights than the average Black kid, because you guys are the 30-40% minority there. So, so the one, overall, yes, but we have a situational advantage in many cases. Two, most of this is social class. I think that really sums it up, actually. Like, there's a study, I've started talking about this a little less because since I keep getting all these book deals, I've been a little slower on some of my academic projects than I expected to be. But a project that I at least set up, that there is some data for, that went pretty much the way I thought it would. There's a survey put out by the BuzzFeed website. It was designed originally by grad students in a pretty good quantitative program, as I recall. It was published on this left-leaning, very popular website that's just titled something like Check Your Privilege. And I actually, in settings where you don't have to go through the full approval process as of yet, like big classrooms, if you're teaching in them, so on, I've actually asked people to complete this survey. Like, what are the results? 1 to 100, how privileged are you? And kind of cutting through all the methods, jarble, and so on, what I find is that 70% roughly of privilege, of your score on a 1 to 100 point metric, is just social class. It's literally how rich your dad was. It wasn't even a complex measure of social class that I used. So I think that's pretty much the answer. White people, because certain whites were here earlier, are more likely to be upper class. And so the mannerisms of that group, language of that group, so on, are more likely to be associated with upper class status. You receive a few benefits as a result of that. But the reality is, if you just took an Irish immigrant kid from Galway and a Black immigrant kid from Ghana today, and you put them in the same mid-level public or prep school, they would wind up in very similar places in life. The difference caused by pure racism, and I would also add genetics or anything of that kind, that would be like 1%, 2%. So there are generational differences in wealth. I don't think there are massive differences in treatment in most of middle-class life today. In fact, I've empirically shown that a couple of times.
Okay. Yeah, I had never thought of it that, going to university was a way of like showing that kind of old school style of like nobility and all that. And yeah, when you graduate and all that, I mean, all those ceremonies and stuff do look kind of like, like druids and kind of cool shit like that. So yeah, I guess it is part of like ceremonial stuff like that. And you know what? And a lot of it too is kind of like programming, because mostly for me when I was growing up, I'm 38 now, but like in my teens and stuff was, you never even thought about that the word, TV programming, it's right there in front of you, right? It's television that's going to program you however they want to you, depending on how you like it. And you know what? When I was growing up, I remember I always caught myself. So I always try to check myself, even like in going back to my sports, like it was like, hey, you need to learn how to win and lose, and also how to play fair. And even growing up, I lived in a side of town where it was like, like Latino lower middle class. And then I had bought a home to fix up, like on a side of town that was like Black lower middle class. And for some reason, when I was at the Little Caesars on my side of town, I didn't really freak out if somebody came to ask me for some money. But so then I caught myself, I was like, why am it's the same class, but why? So then I I got to reprogram myself to do it. And another like example was that like when I would see like, the panhandlers or people asking for money, when I would see like Black or Latino, I would automatically think, pinches lazies, you're lazy. But if I saw white, I'd be like, damn, you must have had it really bad because the system is made for you. So then I stopped doing that to check myself, because I was like, oh, you know what? They're probably all just lazy, or they have mental issues or whatever, So over time, I've had to like reprogram myself or deprogram myself. So yeah, I tend to agree with a lot of kind of like what you're saying, and I've gotten more of this information as I started shifting politically into the right spectrum, and I got into it through the Ron Paul campaign. And the first time I even heard about the idea of hate crime laws was through Ron Paul, and he had a quote that said, federal hate crime laws criminalize thoughts, they're incompatible with a free society. And then he went on to explain why that was. So my question to you is, before we get into the hoax side of some of the hoax that are the most mainstream that we've gotten into, do you think that hate crime laws are necessary in our society?
So, I mean, there's quite a lot there that you covered. I mean, so first of all, yeah, I will say absolutely, Ezri, what I think was kind of the best point there. College is, and I think we both said this, one of those subtle mechanisms that's used to convey class in a society that doesn't have formal nobles. I mean, obviously, a nobleman in the old sense is someone who owns land hereditarily and can charge other people to work it or take a percentage of their crops or whatever. We legitimately don't have that. In Appalachia, where I live, and in Texas in the past, we've come close, but not all the way there. Not all the way. But I mean, in terms of the other things like your university, your eating club, who your fraternity, all that stuff, we certainly have that. So, I mean, like when you graduate from an elite college in an elite field, you literally get a title. I mean, like, for example, I can put either doctor or esquire on my business cards because I'm technically both. And this is I'm actually also technically a baron.
I don't know what an esquire. What do you mean? I've never heard of that. Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, if you graduated from law school, good standing. Certainly, if you passed a major state bar, yeah, you're an ESQ. So like my full title would be like Baron Wilfred Reilly, no, Baron Dr. Wilfred Reilly Esquire, or something like that. You can, by the way, the Baron thing, you can buy noble titles from a couple of small countries like Sealand, I think Lesotho. They're great to give like an ambitious girlfriend. They're real too. Like they'll be recognized about half the time in Europe or Latin America. But I actually do have one of those. And there's actually an entertaining story about some of it in terms of my consulting gig and past jobs and so on. But anyway,
I'd like to hear it. We can get into that too. That'd be cool to hear.
Well, after the answer to the question, but I mean, like, so obviously no one who's not a complete jackass. But anyway, the two real ones are doctor and esquire, and since what we recognize in this society, obviously no one that is not a complete jackass walks around calling himself Baron Dr. Reilly II Esquire. But I mean, there are people in society that could, and they tend to be very aware of it. And like one of the weird indicators of this is like the college sticker, the college display on your vehicle, front of your house, on your sweatshirt. And it's one of those few things that no one, even in male bro culture, I suspect we're both pretty familiar with, makes fun of. Like no one rearranges their Stanford sticker so it says snod fart or something like that. That's an old joke from the writer Paul Fussell, but it's true. No one puts the word not over the word Harvard to make fun of the fact they just went to regular ass college. Because it's understood at some level, these are class signifiers. Like if you have a Harvard sticker and you're the kind of guy who displays it, like you're the Rolex wearing type of guy, you're not going to make fun of it with a joke that might imply you didn't go to Harvard, because that takes your status away. So class is very significant in the USA. I would bet, like when I was on dating websites and so on, I used to do well enough. Like I'm a reasonably good looking guy, although short and kind of arrogant. But I mean, like you could tell looking at pictures that there were certain signifiers. Like, does someone think of themselves as conventionally beautiful, and are they? What's their social class? Like, I remember one guy's picture was him wearing a Gucci watch, holding a Mercedes wheel, but so on down the line. Region, there's some north-south conflict, but there are very definitely things that indicate in the USA, in the egalitarian society, where most people feel they fall on the spectrum. And I do think we try to ignore that to a silly extent, which leads to a focus on these very secondary things like race. Like, sure, racism is real, but in 2021, being Irish or indeed Black or indeed Latino is going to have much less of an effect on your prospects in business or something like that, and how good looking you are, smart you are, where you're from, where'd you go to school. The other thing you said, I think this I don't really have a lengthy response to, but I think everyone's a little bit racist. Like when you look at a white bum and be like, oh, he's crazy. And then you look at a black bum and be like, oh, he's lazy. No, they're both bums. I mean, it's not like you're really going to go out of your way to compliment either guy. But I think everyone has subtle biases like that. Like, oh, white women are crazy, fill in the blank, whereas black women are passionate and loud, whereas Latino women are crazy and passionate and loud. I mean, I don't know whether any of those stereotypes is totally true for everyone, but
you said Latina lady. I was already looking for the chancla to come hit me, man. I was already.
That's funny. Yeah, no, but I mean, it's just like that. But that is the stereotype. And there's some basis of truth. It's actually, the idea is all Mediterranean women, right? Like Latin, Italian, those are very, their families are very much in love. But there's a lot of expressive language. Like that's definitely someone in an argument that'll scream at you. Is the stereotype justified today? Not always, sometimes. But everyone has those beliefs. I guess the question is what difference it makes. And what I find is that, again, among working through middle-class normal citizens today, it legitimately doesn't make that much of a difference. Like, I'm no more likely to give a white bum money than a black bum. I might assume that there are different reasons they're bums, but I also don't care. I mean, my response is kind of get a job unless someone looks crazy. So it's just, again, minor racism. Yeah, I think we all deal with that. But in terms of the hate crime laws, I think that's not a question of really, well, it is a question of opinion, I guess. Should they exist? Probably not, because this again gets into all the characteristics that go into what I call being multivariate and that go into talking with people or defining people. So the whole idea of hate crime is that certain things are totally off limits when it comes even to disliking someone. So, for example, if you attack someone because they're Black or because they're white or because they're female or because they're Jewish, this is a hate crime. But if you attack someone because you don't like lawyers or Republicans or the poor or one of not three or four, 15 or 20 other things, ugly people, fat people, preppies, there's no additional enhancement.
Or the opposing team this past 2 weeks ago in Mexico, one of their soccer league games, they're like 15 dead people because just just sports rivalries, even just for that reason, there's not
the Latin American soccer fans, even by US football standards, are famous for that. Like I remember when I was a kid, I was like 4 or 5, but I was watching this giant riot on television. I asked my mom what's happening, and she was like, "Oh, Jesus kicked the ball into the Brazilian goal or something." So there's a riot. You start to see guys are like brawling with staves and stuff. So, I mean, it's definitely, maybe the English soccer fans have that same level of enthusiasm as the Latin American ones. I don't think so. I don't think they quite get there. But yeah, I mean, but that actually is an interesting point. Like if you wore a Green Bay Packers jacket to Soldier Field for a Bears game, people would literally be trying to pee on you. People would be throwing peanuts and blocks of ice at you, like you'd have to shelter your date. But would those be hate crimes? No, because it's urban rivalries, state rivalries, athletics, that doesn't count. So I really think that what we're doing is just saying that certain forms of thought are forbidden. And that's pretty dumb. Like if you commit a rape or a murder, I mean, the maximum penalty for either of those in a number of states is death. So when you talk about the hate crime enhancement, it's hard to enhance something past human mortality. So no, I would probably get rid of the whole category.
So, but they do exist. So they are a maybe like a pace setter to, or they're fuel to the narrative of that these types of crimes, happen, or at least they allow the, the narrative makers to push those type of stories. But in your book, you give examples of how they usually fall apart really when you put them, I guess, under like jury trial evidence or something, like, hey, or if you really just try to look at these things without just watching them through like mainstream news or something, you can really start breaking these down. Can you kind of give some examples that would be like some main ones where people would be like, oh shit, I didn't, like, even right now, anybody that's watching this that will see would be like, wait a minute, that one was fake? I didn't know. Like, they're going to get tripped out.
So you're talking about what were some of the hoaxes?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first, I think more broadly, and I might get in some quote unquote trouble for this, because I'm going to share this pretty widely as people like listen to some of these cases. But I think that the media narrative, and this is true on the right wing, maybe more white targeting media as well, although not as much, but certainly true on the left, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, WaPost. I think the narrative around virtually every one of these major racial cases, because the goal is to attract clicks by building on pre-existing tensions and maybe by exacerbating tensions, although you don't want to think that, virtually every one of these narratives has been badly flawed. So I mean, when you look at any of the police or citizen shooting cases like Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Jacob Blake, what was said initially was just complete nonsense. Like the claim with Jacob Blake, the brother who was shot in the back in Kenosha, which launched weeks of rioting. It launched the brawl where Rittenhouse shot those men, and so on. The narrative was like he'd been trying to break up a fight between two lovely Black women, and the police had arrived. I didn't even think they'd been called in the first version of this I heard, and they just shot this guy. They shot to kill, hit him with 7 hot ones. What actually happened, that's completely nonsensical. It turned out Jacob Blake was an accused rapist. I mean, you never know what goes on between someone and their ex, but at least her claim is that he broke into her house, grabbed her, like roughly fingered her, said, "This is mine. You better not be with any other men." And then I guess she started crying and he fled, that sort of thing. But she called the police and reported a rape. And the cops had the report and they were taking it seriously. Like there was a warrant out, a body warrant out for Blake, as I understand. So he goes back to the victim's house and it's their kid's birthday or something. So he's there for a little bit, but then he starts behaving erratically. At one point, he threatens to take her vehicle, which has children in it. Cops get called. Blake scuffles with the police for several minutes. He shrugs off a taser. He tries to get into the vehicle that had these kids in it. And it turned out he had a hunting knife in the vehicle. And he finally gets shot and he doesn't die. The marksmanship was pretty good. So that's the real story. But what you heard about that was so false and so spun that it literally started riots that destroyed a good chunk of a city, including a bunch of minority businesses. And this has just gone on and on and on. I mean, like I got into a big debate on Twitter for saying that even in the cases where there is legitimate reason to be angry, like the Ahmaud Arbery case, what the media says is almost invariably wrong. So like the thing with Ahmaud Arbery, you're familiar with this, right?
I think I've heard the names, but you can refresh it.
Yeah, Ahmaud Arbery was this guy. The presentation was a Black man was shot. He was basically lynched for jogging. Like these guys, the McMichaels saw.
Those vatos. Didn't they just get
Yeah, well, first of all, like almost everyone in these cases, if someone is guilty, will get sentenced today. I mean, so we don't have lynch mobs roaming the streets, Black or white. That's the first point. Or Hispanic. You want to be inclusive. But Asian, they're generally not involved in these criminal justice discussions for whatever reason. But anyway, but this Arbery case, the argument was this guy was just running through a neighborhood. He was a frequent jogger, and these crazy white guys tracked him down and shot him. Now, and this sponsored this entire movement that was called "I Run with Maud," like Al-Maud. Like my fiance at one point had an "I Run with Maud" shirt, and she's not a lady of the left. ESPN is producing a documentary about Ahmaud Arbery's contributions to running right now. Like this was the 100% take on this, that this person had probably been killed, at least according to the prosecutor, at least according to everyone on one side of the case, because he was just running through. It actually turned out that when you look at the trial testimony for the case, this area, Saltillo Shores, had a series of burglaries. I believe at one point an expensive gun had been stolen. There's a Facebook group for the neighborhood where people are constantly freaking out about these burglaries. Kids are being told to play inside. And at the same time this is happening, the owner of a bunch of properties in what are called new builds in the area, like 3/4 completed houses just going through construction, keeps seeing the same guy wandering through the buildings at like weird times of day. And there are like multiple recordings of this. And it was Arbery. It was this guy. So when on one particular day, this guy was seen in the neighborhood, and like a posse of local guys does say, hey, what the hell are you doing? And then start chasing him. And it's like this slow speed, ridiculous chase where he's walking or jogging and they're saying like, hey, bro, stop. And they pull 2 trucks in front of him. A guy gets out, he has a gun, and Arbery goes for the guy, understandably, right? And there's a fight and he gets shot. There's a scuffle. Like you can understand why Arbery defended himself or whatever. But that's the actual situation. They thought this guy was the burglar, which is quite possible, and chased him stupidly. Violence breaks out and the guy is tragically killed. And now vigilantism is illegal. So I think it's not surprising at all these guys went to jail. But again, even in this situation, even where it's pretty comprehensible, the whole original storyline turned out to be nonsense. So I don't think I've answered your question yet. So I'm going to rattle off 10 actual hoaxes. But that is the prelude to the book itself and why the book had the impact it did, why the book was a bestseller for a while. A lot of people had been kind of aware at the corner of their mind with, the third eye that a lot of these stories weren't really panning out. But they weren't really examining them all in detail. And what I find in the book is that many or most, let me pull up a list of these actually, of kind of the most recent racially charged incidents, you could say something like that, just turned out not to be true. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to look through these, I mean, you've got Jussie Smollett, obviously the legendary case, This Is MAGA Country. You've got Yasmin Saweed, the torn hijab on the New York 6 train. You've got Air Force Academy, if you follow the media. I mean, this is the case where a general had to go to one of our service academies and encourage people to stop fighting, stop abusing Black cadets. That turned out to all be made up. Eastern Michigan, Kansas State, you've got this terrible racial graffiti on high-end vehicles. Drake University, Oberlin, where you had this whole series of things like made up KKK sightings over a period of years. The Nikki Jolly house fire, where someone who identified as a trans man set her house, or his house, on fire, killed a bunch of purebred dogs to argue that they'd been the target of anti-gay violence. You had the DC dreadlock cutting. I mean, a young Black woman said she was held down. Her hair was lopped off by quote unquote tough white boys. Grand Rapids, where another sort of beautiful young Black girl said she was literally urinated on by a bigot. Hopewell Baptist and the burnt Black churches. Like a huge number of these cases just turned out to be fakes. Like we saw one of them the other day where there'd been this school. It was like Our Lady of the Angels or something like that. But big, well-known Catholic school, 6th through 12th grade, hundreds of kids. There had been a claim that someone had written in the bathroom, like, all you niggers go home, or this place is full of like N-words. And it turned out to be a Black person, like an Afro-Latino girl. It was a hoax. Now the story's just stopped. You're not going to see more about it in the media. So this goes on pretty frequently. Like it's not the majority of crimes. It's not even the majority of hate crimes. But these high profile cases, like at the ball game, they were chanting X. Those almost always turn out to be fakes, or at least to be misrepresentations of the way that Jacob Blake's story was.
Hey, what's up? If you're listening to this ad spot, it's probably because you're halfway through the show, which means that you like what I'm doing, which means that if you also want to support what I'm doing, you can check out palomaverdecbd.com. That is the official sponsor of the show. It is also a company that my wife and I run out of our home. It is a premium grade CBD company where you can get all of your CBD products that you need, from tinctures, salves, soft gels, pet products. And we have some new products, which are massage oils and bath bombs. So if you are looking for any type of CBD products and also want to support the show, visit palomaverdecbd.com. Use the promo code Chingazos, CHINGASOS, for 20% off anything off the store, off your order. So please visit palomaverdecbd.com. Appreciate the support. Peace.
And when we were talking about like the class signifiers of going to college and how they're kind of like low key, and then when listening to you talk about the how and a lot of these narrative story buildups that the newsrooms, I guess, or that they're told, hey, try to, I guess, get the clicks or get or maybe it's already a culture where they do that. Is there anyone at the top? Like, so I started, I guess, thinking of like this evil person saying like this evil racist person, like an actual racist that has like some type of like, and says, you know what, we just can't be outright racist, but if we want to burn down Black businesses, we need to create the stories that will that make that happen. And this is how. So is there anything to that? Like, is there, or is it that it's just a culture of like, we got to get the clicks and these type of, because it's always usually like they don't go to like the suburb neighborhoods and burn down. It's always they're doing it to like their own inner city stuff. Is there any thing to that, or am I just like thinking in a weird place? But like, how could you if you're a racist, how do you burn down Black businesses? Hey, you create these stories that are going to get Black people to, or whatever, I'm trying to kind of ask a little bit, or am I thinking in a weird way?
No, I mean, I think that, so no, I don't think that's true. Like, I don't think the president of CNN, for all of Mr. Zucker's many flaws, although I guess he's being replaced now, is an old school KKK style racist that wants to destroy Black businesses. No, like, I find that, like, it was well phrased, but I find that pretty implausible. I think it's just amoral pursuit of clicks. Like, almost everything one of the things you have to understand if you work in media is that almost everything is incredibly scripted. So if you see someone cough on TV, and it's not a guest, we normally get to talk pretty freely, but if it's the anchor, like, that's very likely written in the script, like human moment or something is how that would be described. So
I never knew that. Really?
Yeah, like, absolutely. Like, a TV, I think Weatherman told me that at a class at Southern Illinois University when I was in college. And you literally see it, like, okay, it's about time for a joke break here, that kind of thing. Even for me, like, I would normally have what I'm about to say, like, pre-written and memorized before I go on the air. And I would imagine most other serious guests do. But so everything is monitored and everything is kind of understood in data numbers. When you look at these businesses, like Fox and MSNBC and CNN release annual totals of like how many watchers for every one of their shows for each 10-minute block. So they have to know what gets attention. And if you're talking about white liberals, what gets attention is going to be fake stories of racism and like women getting ahead or something. It would be the things that you see the most in that environment, or like shit to be scared of. We've created this whole group of terrified upper middle class people in the USA. We really saw this under COVID. We saw how extreme it's become. But I mean, one of the focuses of a lot of television, especially I think on the political left, but is like what the new thing is that's going to kill you. Like, is it a plane crash? Is it fire on the operating table? Is it pit bulls? Is it, white supremacists? Like, just on and on. Every day there's a new fear. There's never going to not be a new strain of COVID. So people do monitor, I think, the reactions to these things, and just amorally, they'll say things like, can you get a few more stories about X? And it's not just like because we want to tell people lies to sell, Ford trucks and boner pills, even though that's the underlying reality. People rationalize things to themselves, right? So it would be, yeah, we know X is going on. We don't want to lose track of that narrative. Let's get out there a little bit. Let's look at that. And I'm sure it's the same thing on the right, like crimes committed by illegal immigrants. Like, one of the things that really surprised me when I found it out is that illegal immigrants don't have an extraordinarily high crime rate. Like, it looks pretty high because the Latino crime rate, it's a younger population. Overall, it's a little higher than the rate for whites. It is what it is. But if you look at people in the same group, like white to white, so you're comparing like Eastern Europeans with Anglos, Latino to Latino, Black to Black, that's a massive difference. We're comparing like Nigerian guys to native born American Black guys. But in every group, like legal and illegal immigrants actually commit fewer crimes than native born Americans, which actually makes, except for stupid shit like drunk driving, But like that makes sense at some level, because if you're in the country illegally and you have a job as like a construction foreman or something, you don't want to get arrested, go to county jail, and then get sent to another country. So you're probably going to drink at home. You know, it's not necessarily that you're an angel. It's just that there's common sense rules of behavior being observed. But in that case, you're talking about a right-wing audience. Like there are certain things that will draw clicks. I would imagine one of the things that draws clicks for Fox is like blonde killed. You keep seeing these stories about like beautiful little girls kidnapped, or like the Kate Steinle thing. That was an illegal immigrant killing a blonde. That's pay dirt. But I mean, like mother killed in divorce battle. So the goal is to get people watching your nonsense. And what actually happens to, you know, individuals that believe this stuff, that's not really discussed. Kind of last sentence for me, but I think you hit on a good point there. Because we keep hearing that these things, like the idiotic QAnon conspiracy from Reddit and 4chan, that these are dangerous to people, like that there are a lot of, you know, QAnon believers out there that have been radicalized. But there are far more people that have been radicalized by MSNBC than by QAnon. There are far more people that have watched Van Jones and Don Lemon and Al Sharpton. These are guys that have full-on primetime television shows, right? Say crap like, you know, 1,000 unarmed black men, paraphrasing, of course, are killed every year, who assume that that's real than there are devotees of any nutty internet theory. So we never seem to think like, what's going to happen if those people believe that? Wouldn't it be logical for someone who believes this to hate whites or hate the country or be strongly paranoid about just day-to-day life? So I think that's obviously real. And that's what makes the question important. No, I don't think it's all plotted out by like one guy in the executive producer's chair. You know, a lot of people in the upper elite come pretty close to being vampiric, but I don't think anyone's just going to do that. Like, yeah, let's get them to burn down their own neighborhoods. If nothing else, there are TVs in the houses in those neighborhoods that CNN would like to be turned to CNN.
So then whatever happens in society because of these narratives is just part of the game. What they care about is you know, whether their executives or whatever is turning a profit for their ad, or you know, getting advertising money, and that's that's it. So that's the name of the game. And so then the question then is, if that is the game or the way that it's played, someone that consumes mainstream news or TV programming, what would be the best way to strategically watch it in a way where it benefits you and not the boner pills that, you know, they're trying to sell you, I guess?
Well, part of my advice would be that now, actually, first of all, I do think there is some reasonably solid journalism. Like a lot of local journalism is actually pretty good when they go out and interview the mayor and so on. And I found a lot of the people that I've worked with, like, I've done some of the less political shows on Fox. Like I've done like Brian Kilmeade, Shannon Bream. I assume CNN has, actually I did Tucker Carlson, is quite professional, a good experience, but obviously he has a strong political viewpoint. But I would assume that as much as I dislike these networks, CNN has something similar. There's a late night show that focuses on Northern Hemisphere politics or something like that. Like that's pretty reliable. So, okay, local news is generally pretty decent. If you're going to watch one of the big networks, I guess look for content that's not openly political. Like Brit Hume used to be on Fox and basically just delivered the news. If you're going to watch the political content, like I still find Tucker hilarious. Although he sometimes says stuff I dramatically don't agree with. But I mean, like, just be aware that this is a political point of view. And I guess that's the important thing. Like, I'm pretty sure everyone knows Tucker Carlson has a political point of view. I don't think everyone knows that to the same extent about, say, Chris Cuomo or someone like that. Like, be aware that you're very certainly not getting unbiased content. You're getting wittily presented biased content that's designed to sell the boner pill. Piece of advice 3, watch content from outside your society. Like Al Jazeera or the BBC, I mean, those are located in like nominal allies. They don't hate America, but there's no faux US patriotism going on. So you'll just hear what people in the rest of the world think we should do as Ukraine. So that's a good piece of advice. Watch the foreign channels, learn a foreign language while you're at it. But anyway, point 4, I guess the best solution is just not to watch TV. Honestly, like, I mean, I have one of my books behind me and a blatant plug, a hate crime hoax. But in a typical book like that, I mean, over 400 pages, you're going to have like 500 sources. there's an entirely different level of content, level of quality that you're going to find if you just go to the library or the local bookseller than you're going to find from, any of the networks that I've been throwing punches at for 15 minutes. So the best piece of advice would probably be go to the library. If you have a question about a study you read in the New York Times or something that scientists have discovered X, just email them and request the study, or go on, JSTOR and pay a few bucks and read what was actually said. I mean, that's the best way to gather news and information. I mean, for the people listening to like me talking on your show, they're probably a pretty smart bunch. Like, just go to the primary source. Like, if you want crime data, just Google US government crime data 2019. And we mentioned this earlier. You'll find the BJS, you'll find the FBI. That's the crime report before anyone can spin it. And you'll see that blacks or Southern whites have a fairly high crime rate. But unless you're a bigoted idiot, you'll also be like, oh, the average person in those groups is like 22. I mean, you'll be able to actually just look at the data, column by column of the data, and decide what your opinion is without someone telling you what it is.
Yeah, that requires a lot of work. So that's probably why people like to just get into, when you were saying earlier about it being scripted, and not everything, but mostly maybe is that like, and this is not my idea, but it was this, his name is Eric Weinstein, and he has that idea of the kayfabe, or, how like all these layers of like, wrestling rules are basically applied to our like society. And if you use that as a tool to look at society, you can kind of see how the game is being played out like in real time. And, recently I used that tool during COVID, and yeah, man, it was like it was like the flipping of teams and the drafting of different ideas for, like, it was like a free for all, because I remember pre-COVID, it was like cool in like hipster lefty, like to not get vaccines.
Oh yeah.
And then it kind of turned into like, no, you got to get, or like, I don't know, man, it was just a lot. So I guess, so a question to you would be like, how did the narratives behind COVID benefit the power players in media and the power players in government? Meaning, like, is government really always there? It seems like it's always there to prepare, to always kind of like keep everybody in fear. But that's also it also aligns with media, and it kind of always feels weird that a lot of times media and government people always kind of intermarry in between themselves. It's like there's like this big narrative that's always being played, and it's always to be like scared of something. But COVID, that one, there was people dying. I mean, I knew people that died, and it was like some real shit. Like, but with this way of looking at things, I just took a step, actually a lot of steps back, and you could kind of get a different feel if you just weren't in those. I would kind of like grand narrative vortexes, because they're big vortexes and they just suck up little narrative truths, and there's truths here and truths there on both sides, and then they just kind of, and then you're either in one of them. But if you just step back and you don't get into one of those, you can kind of just see it for what it is, and it's just like a match between two sides. It just, I don't know, man. It's just some weird. It's not weird. It's just the game, man. I don't know. I mean, there's never really three vortex narratives fighting. They always turn into two. It's always two, but I don't know if I even asked the question, man. I was kind of freestyling there, but I guess your whole take on the COVID narratives and how.
No, I get what you're saying there. So yeah, there's the narrative and there's also the reality. First of all, as like a right-leaning writer with a pretty big audience, I'll open by saying what I always do. Like, yes, COVID was obviously real. If you're anything but perfect health, and even probably then, go get vaccinated. I mean, like, I think there really has been in bro culture and right-wing culture, there's been the backlash you described, like, oh no, I don't see anyone dying out there. I'm a strong guy. You have like people posting like, this is my COVID vaccination. They're like in the gym lifting an okay amount of weight. Like, I mean, I'm not really all that patient with that. Like, there's grandmothers out here, like, okay. So COVID obviously is real. I mean, the total death toll for COVID, you can subtract a few at the margins, but it's like 800,000. So that's a reality. That said, I definitely also think that there's been a narrative around COVID. And to a certain extent, the main narrative has been what a lot of people who are no longer active on social media, like Alex Berenson, Boricua Gatto, like a lot of different guys, doctors, have called sort of the apocalypse narrative. Like, that's been the dominant take on COVID-19. And I think whatever you might think of those sources, that's absolutely correct. Like, you kept seeing these pieces. Again, being featured by CNN and NBC, so on down the line, not to pick on the same actors, but with titles like one that comes to my mind is Tomás Puello, the tech executive, The Hammer and the Dance, where he argued that about 10 million people were going to die from COVID-19. That was something you can still find it on Medium, The Hammer and the Dance, very well written. And you can see the comments from people in the professional managerial class. There were thousands of them. Thank you for telling the truth and this kind of thing. That was what most people thought about COVID-19 at the beginning. I mean, I can't forget Neil Ferguson. If you remember this guy, I mean, the British doctor who, with a long record of being wrong, by the way, who said that bird flu would kill about 50 million people. But with COVID, I mean, his prediction was that in the USA, and I think his middle scenario, please correct me, audience, if it's the worst case, but he said we'd lose 2.5 million people by August of 2020. This is the kind of shit that was out there. And very serious data shows that this is what people think happened. I mean, Kex TC, the big consultancy, asked a pool of 1,000 randomly selected Americans what percentage of the population they thought had already died of COVID. This was in like September of 2020. The average response was 9%. So it's worth pulling out some of the actual COVID stats from pieces I wrote. I mean, I did an article for Spiked, popular press, but very empirical, looking at whether lockdowns work, for example. And what I found, first of all, lockdowns didn't work very well, but the actual data around COVID was very, very different from what people are being told. Like, first of all, right off bat, the average COVID-19 victim was 81. That's the best figure I've ever been able to crunch out of the data, but it's right around there, 80, 81 years.
Like in US, in the US or for the world?
In the US.
Okay.
But also throughout the developed world. I mean, if you look at the Times of India, I mean, they ran a famous piece, median age of Italy's dead is 81. And that really went beyond Italy to look at the first French cases and so on, if I recall correctly. So we're talking about the median victim is 80. Sort of center-right consulting firm, I don't want to misname them, but found out at one point that more than half of the deaths were in nursing homes. So this is something that's extremely, extremely targeted. And even with all of, so one, the median victim was an elder, very sick senior, right? The IFR outside or below 85, I think is where this was calculated. Just the IFR, the fatality rate for the disease in general society was 0.26%. That's from the CDC. They had that figure by July of 2020. Again, I'm sure they may have updated it by a few points later on. But that's what the reality was. This is a disease that's very dangerous to old people. Protect seniors, wear a mask around your grandmother. But that's it. Primarily, that's the vector pool for the disease. And we didn't lose 10% of the population. We lost about one person in 500 so far. There are 350 million Americans, 800, 900,000 losses. So COVID-19, it's fair to say, like, okay, this is the fourth leading cause of death in a typical upcoming year. And that's bad. This is when AIDS, like when AIDS hit the scene, right? And it became a top 12 cause of death. We say, okay, there's a new disease and it's going to cause a minor modification of my lifestyle. If I have sex with someone raw for the first, well, I'm not going to for the first couple of times, I'm going to wear a condom. That was it. That was a response to AIDS. People started carrying condoms in their wallet again. It's much of the same thing here. If you're going to be in a senior heavy environment, make sure your vaccination status is up to date, or maybe wear a mask. The hysteria about COVID-19 doesn't match reality at all. It's just completely made up. And yeah, you're right that the media played a role in that. So why did we see the apocalypse narrative predominate? I think that there are three reasons. I mean, one is the media. We've already thrown plenty of darts at the media. Clicks, panic. Suburban wives are the target. They control the budget in most households. So yeah, it's no surprise why they are showing, these are the offerings on our alternative streaming channels. You don't have to leave the house. This is a sale offered by our advertising partner, Kroger. Better get to the store quick. They're stealing the toilet paper. It's no shock why the media did what the media did. I think the second category of people that contributed to the panic narrative are what I call the PMC, like the professional managerial class, people with titles like HR director, that really have the option of rarely encountering people. You live in the suburbs, you're a half acre away from anybody else, your work's mostly virtual, you drive, an air-conditioned Lexus home, you just don't see a lot of people. You don't really stop at like the soccer pitch in the hood and play. It's the sort of thing even I, and probably you still do. I still play basketball in Central Frankfurt and Lexington. And if you see guys there, people will just stop. Like, you'll turn off your radio and go talk to people. The people that didn't do that, that don't do that, were very, very responsible for this whole panic. Like even now, if you look at the tech firms in Chicago, or I know San Antonio and Austin, by the way, or most other cities, like nobody's back to work. Guys I knew from that sort of trading floor game, I mean, they are at home on computers playing the market. And it's fun to do that. You sleep with your wife, you throw a bone to the dog. You don't have to commute 3 hours in Texas traffic in the summer. So I mean, I think those people were very much like, yeah, we don't want to take any risk at all, just one life, right? Instead of being on an abusive trading floor, you're at home cooking arugula. So that's the second group. Very, very afraid. Also, they are marginally gaining from the shutdown. They're not losing anything. So the American upper middle class, which includes almost all the reporters, by the way, has a personal vested interest in this continuing. Like their already low risk of COVID is cut by half, and they don't have to work. And finally, I think that something we're never really talking about here is that pharma has a huge interest in this narrative containment. I mean, like the CEO of Pfizer just said people are going to need to get their it's their fifth vaccine, their fourth booster. Correct me if I'm off by one. But like, of course, that's like bartender suggests third drink kind of stuff. Like, of course, Pfizer, they did a great job developing the drug, but they're a large, amoral pharma company that's been sued dozens of times. So, of course, they want you to do this. And when you have the pressure from pharma, and again, look at who the primary advertisers are on these networks. You have the pressure from the upper middle class that's producing the articles, and then you have that natural financial incentive for the media. That's how you got, without anyone intending it, this sort of whirlwind cycle that became COVID. And I don't really think there's much doubt about that at all.
But then the government reacts to them, or do they react to the government policies? Like what comes first? Does it, you know what I'm saying? Like government policies were the pace setters, right? To like, or are you saying that these guys never spoke up against it? They were okay with whatever government policies came out first, where did government play its role here? Like the policymakers that said, oh, like let's have lockdowns, or let's have lockdowns, and then after a while of getting like evidence that maybe different states were doing different things, and maybe they weren't, like national lockdowns weren't necessary or something, like what were the policymakers on this? Or do they just again go with like the lobbyists, the big pharma lobbying, or like who makes them move? Because like that was the question earlier too, was like they still kind of play into this fear thing. And I interviewed a local newspaper writer here, and he gave the same thing, like, oh, there's people on the right that think our mayor gets a trip out of locking down the city, and that that narrative can scale up to like, oh, the presidents and the governors, oh, they get off to this control. And he was, he gave me the vibe like, man, they don't want to be locking down this stuff, but it's it's what the science is and all that. But I mean, is that the case, or is it that some do like the lockdowns because they get a little thing off their control? I mean, I don't know. There's a little question there that is that some narratives there that are playing.
Yeah, no, all the questions are good. I mean, so again, I think something that's worth keeping in mind if you're not a political guy by background is the old, like, never assume cannibal evil when you can assume incompetence canard. I mean, no, I don't think most people are smart enough or brave enough to be like true evil predators. I mean, when you read about like ancient history, like I recently read a book about the Vikings versus the old Norman Knights. I mean, I read previously Aztecs, the book from like 1910, talking about like Cortez v. Moctezuma. I think those guys would be capable of just saying, for my entertainment, their lives. I don't really think too many people in modern like digital media are that level of warrior. So I think often you're seeing people sort of cringingly submit to demands from their political allies. I think you're seeing people make decisions they think are unfortunate but justified that aren't, because they don't know how to do math all that well. I think that this is 99% of it. Like in the military, probably when you see like Mad Dog Mattis talk, or like the old Saddam Hussein back in the day, like those guys might be capable of just being like, kill them all, God will know his own. But I don't think you saw a lot of that under COVID. No. So I think that there are a couple of things. First, the reporters claim, and again, like a good regional reporter in San Antonio is a member, as I am in some ways, of the class that I'm describing, the PMC. So he's giving the usual narrative. Sure, he's a great guy. But no, there is substantial evidence that narrative is wrong. I mean, we can debate whether we should shut down all of society to protect sick elder seniors. And my priest might dislike this, but the answer is no. Freedom itself has a value. Young love has a value. That doesn't make any sense. Hundreds of thousands of people in the final count will die because of alcoholism, drug abuse, so on, brought on by an enforced 2-year lockdown. It's insane. Never been done before. But I can see someone at least making that argument. But the simple reality is that the claim that we had to, this was a plague level disease, Ferguson was right, Pueo was right, there's virtually no evidence for that. We're talking about a 0.3 IFR. We're talking about the third or fourth leading cause of death in a normal year. There's no reason to react with more frenzy than we do to pneumonia plus TB combined, say, what, cancer, heart disease, medical accident. There are a lot of things, including some transmissible things, when you think about how people get lung cancer, that are right there at the top of that list. So no, I think more specifically, by the way, we didn't see the states that didn't shut down suffering dramatically more. Like, I mean, in Texas overall, the governor was Abbott. So you can actually compare the blue cities that did a little more. None of you guys panicked and totally locked down. But with the red outlying suburban counties that are quite highly populated, my understanding is there's like a 1 or 2% difference in death rates. So again, I don't think you can justify locking people down for a year in a country that has a huge mental health problem to prevent a 1% increase in the natural rate of death. It would actually be like a 1/10 of 1% increase because most deaths aren't from COVID. You have 350,000 COVID deaths in a year, but you have 3 million deaths. But this is getting into math. But anyway, I don't think that the narrative was justified by the facts. And I think we know that because Ron DeSantis, Abbott, the entire government of Sweden, the entire government of Japan, the people in major player regions that didn't do this did fine. We're debating 3-4% differences at the margins. So why did so many people continue to behave in what I think of as an almost cowardly fashion? Once they knew that the risk was quite low, why are you still masking the kids, making them eat lunch outdoors? That's not a good thing to do. We've known the data on children since like September 2020, very low risk. I think a big part of that is simply that this became so partisan. I mean, so like, as you said, traditionally, like hippies have been much less likely to get vaccinated, been much more comfortable with dirt and sort of funky hygiene. They're like jokes about sex with hippie girls and running and road races in California and all kind of things because patchouli all over the body, because this is a known characteristic of the breed. Traditionally, conservatives are more focused on cleanliness, all of this. In this case, and you saw this early on with the most critique of a potential vaccination when Trump was working on developing this coming from the left, Kamala Harris, I'm not going to take a rush Donald Trump vaccine, probably the single most idiotic thing that was said about the vax. So initially you saw that, but for a bunch of weird reasons, after Trump's defeat, then that idiotic riot, then left and right both going ham for a couple of months. By the time Biden was fully ensconced in office, it had become sort of a right-wing point of pride to probably not get vaccinated and certainly not to take just logical steps to prevent COVID. So like something, even as a guy on the right, that I wouldn't have done is allow, for example, South Dakota, that motorcycle rally, what is it, Sturgis and all the associated stuff?
Yeah.
There are like 200,000 people there. And there are all these studies of whether this spread COVID. Let's be real, it probably did. But you're seeing all this on the right. And I think that caused a countervailing reaction where people on the left knew at some level that what they were doing was bullshit, but they didn't want to be associated with people that were rejecting the vaccine and so on down the line. And I actually think the left on COVID very likely did more damage than the right. Like when you look at all the stuff that was done by these sort of woke people because just one life or we had to, I mean, it's things like allowing giant riots while the rest of your city is shut down. Shipping old people, sick seniors back into nursing homes because you have civil rights and legal concerns and them infecting the entire nursing facility. That's why New York and New Jersey are still so close to the top in terms of COVID deaths. We can't ever forget that.
What did that have? What did the civil rights stuff come in with nursing? What do you mean by that?
Well, no, the big blue states generally ship sick seniors back into nursing homes. Then that civil rights law, don't you remember that? Like Cuomo, that's what he did.
Yeah. So I mean, I remember that. I mean, but I guess nothing really happened to it. Like, so they just put them back into the nursing homes and they.
Yeah, but then everybody else died.
Okay. So yeah, I did hear that, but it just seemed like nothing happened. Like, okay, they just died, right? And right, didn't it feel weird that
Yeah, nothing. Well, nothing happened. Nothing was done to him. Cuomo was kicked out of office for like grabbing people's asses.
That was worse, right? Than like just
Yeah, and then killing
having a
all those.
policy of like mass murder, like to.
Yeah, but I mean, so like, I don't think the left is better on this. Like, we can debate whether civil rights law was the main reason for shitback policy, but like, you've got to look at the continuing lockdowns, like the damage that was done to kids, 2 years out of a real classroom. You do have shitback policy. You have allowing the riots and saying stupid shit like the more serious pandemic is white supremacy as your explanation. Like, all of that is on the left wing side of the counter if we are counting, and on the right side there's anti-vaxxing, so on. That's very real too. But the point that I'm making is just because of these partisan differences, it was very hard for leaders. And I've seen this locally in, I guess, a leadership role in some ways. But it's very hard for leaders to kind of meet in the middle and say, okay, let's unmask the kids, but also encourage the vaccination for seniors. Like, it wouldn't be very difficult to draw up a COVID plan that would effectively respond to COVID, but that's not really what we've seen.
So then it's political in that, but they can't do that because if they have to go extreme to like security, the same way like like 9/11, right? They had to go extreme security after that because if they don't come off as going that route because they have the power to do that, then their next opponent will say, oh, they didn't do everything they could to protect this or that, so they can't meet in the middle, I guess, right? I mean, it goes to like the optics of politics. And then I guess then they do like surveys or they have their consultants say, hey, I think it's safe now it's actually safe. It's been safe to take off mask and all that, but now it's actually safe politically for you to kind of like step back. So, man, that sucks, man. It's all like political shit. So in, to respect your time, I've always thought that, so on the left side, I've always respected Bill Maher. He was like kind of my political guy that got me into politics, and then Ron Paul. So like I've always considered them kind of like pace setters to me. And Ron Paul was kind of a pace setter during COVID to say like, yes, it's bad, but just kind of like take a step back. And then Bill Maher was like on board, but then it wasn't too far along before he was kind of questioning the narrative too, and kind of in that way. How do you have people that you see as pace setters for yourself, or is it that you just know the game enough to set your own pace and then you hope people kind of follow and like follow your post and all that? Because like now, yeah, man, a lot of people, I guess it's about keeping it cool, right? Or keeping it chill. Like, if you can keep it cool and chill and then just kind of explain how reality is, then you're gonna be better off on both ends of the narrative vortexes, where you don't get wrapped up into them. You can just kind of be like, I see your point and I see your point, but the reality is this, or something like that. Do you have any pace setters that you kind of get into that you like to watch or that you consume? And on that end?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like my inspiration as a thinker, especially as a Black thinker who leans right, would probably be Thomas Sowell, the legendary economist who started, again, his whole thing was like looking empirically at these questions in society. So, I mean, he wrote a book called Affirmative Action Around the World, where he looked at the affirmative action debate, and he was like a talking head on television in the late 80s. And he said, well, I'm hearing a lot of people talk about whether this is morally good or bad. And I'm hearing a lot of people talk about it in the USA, but I'm not seeing a lot of people talk about whether it works. Like, do test scores improve? And I'm not seeing a lot of people note that this goes on globally. Like, there are affirmative action programs for quote unquote backward classes in India that are bigger in scope than anything we do. So he actually took some of his money, traveled around the world, studied affirmative action policies, and wrote them up. And he found these really consistent themes, like they make people try less hard in school. They irritate sort of the majority group, but it's hard to get rid of them because the idea is quota. So you like get a set number of majority group people, set number of minority group people used to these very upper end jobs. But anyway, like that's kind of a dry, wonky book. A lot of his stuff's a lot funnier and more interesting, like The Vision of the Anointed. But that would be the guy that I try to follow in terms of the sense of just taking what the actual facts are and looking at them kind of with blinkers off. So he's one of the best guys that's ever done that. Bill Maher, yeah, you could pick many worse people to follow. Who's a politician that I like? I don't know. I don't know if I have a politician I like. But Thomas Sowell is probably the guy. And there are a lot of great people that I've worked with. I'm an executive board member for FAIR, which is the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, which is everyone from sort of Glenn Lowry to Megyn Kelly. So very impressive people there for FAIR. I'm also one of the founders of 1776 Unites with Bob Woodson, who kind of has a sort of Booker T. Washington narrative in response to the mainstream civil rights movement. Carol Swain. So I mean, like, there are quite a few people I admire. I don't think anyone just wakes up in the morning with their own philosophy fully developed and starts kind of bringing that forward. So those are some of the people that I've picked things up from over the years. In terms of narrative, I mean, one thing that I would advise like the normal middle class guy listening to your show to realize is that the narrative is usually wrong. This doesn't mean that in any particular point you should go follow some crazy conspiracy theory, but a good way to think about it is that it's about as accurate as advertising. Like, I mean, when you actually go to the store, there's no difference in quality between chicken from Walmart or Kroger and chicken from Purdue or Hampshire Farms or whatever that costs 3 times as much, because they're actually literally legal government standards about what chicken is. So why do people pay, it's not 3 times as much, but $2.49 more per pound for this bird meat? Well, because it has the fancy name on it, because someone's told them something about this thing that's going to benefit that company. And that's what you normally see when you're watching mainstream media or whatever. I mean, you see the Republican narrative, the Democratic narrative. You see just nonsense, like we're not supposed to talk about sex in public. So, I mean, until the 70s, women who said they had clitoral orgasms were considered to be nymphomaniacs. Like, everyone has these goofy rules like this. Now it seems like we're doing this with racism, where like people are getting fired for saying you shouldn't say the word nigger. I mean, stuff like that, like Papa John. So you're seeing the taboos in your society when you look at the mainstream narrative. You are seeing the advertising from different players. You're seeing the political stuff. So most things that you hear are not exactly right. And that's why it's so important, as in like the Jacob Blake case, the example that I've given, to kind of really dig in if you're interested in something and see what the truth is. And remember, when you look at that one thing, you'll be amazed by the difference between reality and what you were at first told. Just remember that same gap exists with everything else.
Yeah, man. Perfect. Yeah, thank you for coming on. I gotta respect your time, and man, I had a couple more questions, but that was cool, man. Can you tell the audience where they can get a hold of you and check out some of your stuff and any type of projects that you have up and coming?
Sure, I'm pretty wired in, probably to the point that it sometimes annoys clients who, like, while I'm working on a paper, can also see me on Twitter or see, the university website updating with stuff I've done or whatnot. But I mean, if you just Google me, like, I'm Wilfred, Wilfred, Reilly, Irish last name, Reilly. If you just Google me, you'll find my Twitter, Facebook, university website, email. I mean, all of that within the first 6 results. So just get in touch if you have a question or something like that about a data set, anything along those lines.
Perfect. And super final last question. What is a narrative that we should be looking for that is coming down the line that we should look and hear with the skeptical view?
Well, I think that the big one right now is what I call the continuing oppression narrative, acronym intentional, but it's this general. So I wrote a piece for City Journal recently. I think myself and Chris Rufo both talked about these concepts. I ended up just writing the piece. But I mean, it was sort of like, what is critical race theory, or what is wokeness really? Like, are these just terms that we use on kind of like Team Light Red, or do they mean something? And I said, I actually had read about 15 different post-Marxist articles for a book like that week. And when we were consulting, we were kind of like doing business talking. And I said that all of them had 3 themes in common. Like, one is the idea that sort of facially neutral systems like prison or intelligence testing are actually like internet spelling, but are actually set up to oppress like one particular group, like Blacks or whatnot. That's one theme, or Hispanics or women or quote unquote white trash, poor. That's the argument of any post-Marxist theory, that like what looks like a fair neutral system is actually set up to screw you over. So like your problems aren't actually your fault. They're due to the capitalist means of production. Point 2 of this, the CON, is this idea that disparities alone indicate discrimination. So if you see that Black people make on average 82% of what whites do, which is correct, you found racism. Now, in reality, no, you haven't. Like, I'm sure racism contributes a point or two to that, but the average Black guy is more than a decade younger than the average white guy. Like, you have to adjust for things using modern quantitative methods, which is like that one sentence is kind of my brand. You have to adjust for things using modern quantitative methods. is kind of my like, just keep watching the skies. But I mean, but point two of this is once you find a disparity, you found discrimination. And point three is the solution is equity, which logically follows if you accept all this Southern nonsense, but it's just sort of what we need to make things fair is exact proportional representation of every possible group. That is when fairness will be reached, which is crazy. I mean, that would mean the NBA would be 50% female if you took it seriously. But I think that this is a narrative that we're going to see a lot of. We're going to see a lot of like Ibram Kendi clones coming into your business, factory, whatever, wherever you have to work, office, and saying, you know, it looks to me like we got a few too many Hispanic males driving big trucks here. We need more Asian women. Like, I think that this is going to be something that we see down the pipe.
Oh, really? You think that's coming? You think that's coming? Yeah. Like, you know,
absolutely.
Oh, shit.
In almost every field. Oh, like when you said you're like a business guy, you're bidding for city contracts, like you're going to be asked with, I bet this, I am a betting man. I would bet that within 2 years, you're going to be asked to fill out some type of diversity statement. Like, although I am a Hispanic business owner, I fully incorporate both Blacks and Anglo whites into my workforce here at, you know, like Gonzalez Enterprises, you know, LTD. And I make efforts to bring in women. And of course, it's just going to be ritual bullshit. Like, I'm sure you're not a bigot, but I'm also sure a family member is going to play a big role in that business. But I think that this is something that is coming. And I think at the Fortune 500 level, people aren't going to be able to kind of like wittily resist it. Like, there's going to be a department in every business in charge of overseeing this. It's not going to be the biggest deal in the world. Like they do it in India, they do it in South Africa, but it is going to be an expensive pain in the ass. It's going to do nothing for race relations.
Man, that is crazy. So maybe I can have you back on when that starts playing out. And yeah, thank you for coming on. And I appreciate that you did. And I hope that some people in my audience can follow you and start considering you as a pace setter for them. And they can start getting a little, they can be more chill because you're chill.
All right. Well, fair enough. Thanks for having me on, man.
Cool, man. Thank you.
Peace out.